Hi, I want to talk about campaigning past and present. Very little on the past and more on the present. But I did just want to fill you in a little bit on what's been going on in the past. Anne mentioned that we've been fairly low profile in Italy until relatively recently. We have actually been quite busy both in Italy and in Europe. I just want to very briefly say what we've been doing. We've been going in Italy since late 2016, and these things take time to build up. It takes time to get political connections, things like that. But from spring of 2017, we were actively engaged with Italian politicians. Unfortunately, at the time, PD was in control and were much more sympathetic, I think, than the present government. But that's actually not to say that the present government is unsympathetic to British citizens. We have never, in the whole process, talked to anybody from any party or any background at all who's been hostile to British citizens in Italy. We have been very lucky in that respect compared with our counterparts living in the UK. But we were working on Italian government level. I gave evidence to a Senate committee in the spring of last year, for example. And then when the government changed, there was quite a hiatus before we could work out who we should get in touch with in the new government, apart from the fact that it took 2 months for the government to be formed. But we have had sort of contacts going on in the background through that time. The main effort in the first year or so was at EU-UK level, and British in Italy, as Anne says, has been part of this coalition called British in Europe, which is largely similar groups in the main countries where there are a number of UK citizens resident, and some cross-country groups like Expats Hear Our Voice, like ECRA, and others you may have heard of. But British in Europe is run by consists of 10 central groups. There are some smaller groups which don't have quite the same rights within the group. The 10 central groups have a steering committee of 10, actually chosen more for their skills than particularly for the country or group they come from. But it is a highly skilled, highly professional group. I can say this rather blowing our own trumpet, but I think we need to do that. We've got a couple of professional lobbyists. We've got a retired barrister, which is me. We've got a lifelong employee of the Conservative Party who escorted Margaret Thatcher on her election tours and things like that. So a lot of inside knowledge, a lot of inside contacts, a writer, and a lot of people who are really, really good at social media. And working together, we've been, I think, quite a formidable force. One of the key decisions we made from the very beginning was, this isn't just about us, it's not just about British in Europe, it's also about our counterparts in the UK. And they're represented, as probably most of you will know, by a group called the 3 Million, which was dreamt up by a marketing man, a French marketing man who lives in Bristol. And of course, they're not a group of 3 million, but they represent 3 million people in the UK, so it was a brilliant piece of marketing, and they have been extremely effective as well. And we have always, both groups, despite difficulties at times when we had slightly different interests, we've always worked together, we've always campaigned together, and we've always sought the same things. And that's been highly effective at getting us top-level access on both sides. And just to finish off this little promotion of British in Europe, and to an extent British in Italy, we have had emails, personal emails, from very, very senior officials on both sides, from the UK and from the European Commission, paying tribute to our work, to its quality, and to the fact that we don't give up. So I just wanted to mention that because I think it's important that people know it. A lot of it has been behind the scenes, but it has been, I think, as effective as it could be. It's built up from nothing to a pretty effective lobbying force within a period of about 18 months. That's the background. I want now to move on to what we're doing now. What are our problems? First of all, we've got the withdrawal agreement being highly unlikely to pass through the UK Parliament. Withdrawal agreement is not great, but it does preserve most of our rights, freedom of movement being the big one that goes missing. But it wouldn't have been too bad if the withdrawal agreement and the rights it contained had been passed. what have we got as a reaction to the possible no-deal scenario? We've got reactions from both sides of the channel. The first was the European Commission paper that Delia mentioned, published on the 13th of November, which, to my mind, and I'm perhaps being slightly unfair to them, largely washes its hands of the problem. It says this is a matter for members, as far as citizens' rights are concerned, this is a matter for member states to sort out, and they have to ensure, as Delia said, that they're in a position to issue permits to stay to everybody who's British on the 30th of March next year, without actually much practical help in doing that, and without much appreciation of the fact that in most countries, to process that number of applications by the 30th of March next year is simply impossible. That's the European Commission suggestion. The UK's suggestion, which is mainly aimed at EU citizens living in the UK, is rather better, and in this sense the UK is ahead of the game. The UK has in place both legislation and immigration rules which set up their settled status scheme, the one they intended in the withdrawal agreement to replace the existing EU rights of EU citizens in the UK. That is in place, and on the 30th of March, EU citizens in the UK will be protected. They'll have such protection as that scheme gives them, and it is then up to the UK to take away those rights later if they want to do so. At the moment, they're committed in a recent paper not to doing so, except to a limited extent, limited actually in a very important way, because family reunification rights are considerably less under that than they are under the withdrawal agreement, and that to my mind is a hugely ungenerous gesture by the British, which has really upset a lot of European countries. But that apart, most of the rights would remain. How are we dealing with this situation then? I've been to Brussels talking about this. We've been talking to the Italian government about it. We said from the very beginning, if you make an agreement and when you make an agreement on citizens' rights between the two sides, it should be ring-fenced. Because we could see from the beginning that citizens' rights was actually not that contentious. There would be arguments, but we could see that this was something in which both sides had a very strong interest and strong national interest in sorting, both because they don't want a whole lot of illegal people living in their country, and also to some extent to protect their own nationals who are living abroad. So it should have been and was capable of being sorted, and to some extent it has, although it's not brilliant what they've come up with. But it is a solution of sorts. And so we said there are then knotty problems. Obviously the divorce bill was always going to be difficult, although they sorted that more easily perhaps than we thought they would. The Irish problem was always going to be huge and still is. And so we said from the very beginning, ring-fence whatever agreement you make about our rights. Say that whatever else happens, that will be an international treaty binding each side, and it will protect our rights. And throughout this process, but most particularly when we've been really stepping up the pressure on ring-fencing recently, we've been told, no, to even talk about what happens in a no-deal scenario will be to undermine the agreement and the negotiating process. Even after the withdrawal agreement had been signed and was clearly not going to go through the UK Parliament, we've had the same message. Finally, after this week's, I don't know, I'm lost. This week's event, if I can put it that way, I think the message is getting through that actually something now has to be done. What has been done? 3 countries in particular have done something already about no deal in the sense of legislating for that situation. The UK, I've mentioned already. Germany has some law in place and some more promised. France has put in place enabling legislation to pass by decree measures which will protect citizens. The headline which they sort of published that law under said, what we're trying to do is replicate unilaterally the rights conferred by the withdrawal agreement. Whether that actually happens, I'm not sure, because they've also been very concerned in France to ensure reciprocity, that they will give UK citizens in France nothing better than their citizens have back in... Yeah, okay. I'm being moved on, quite rightly. Anyway, that's France. course, interruptions always just throw you completely because you have no clue where you've gone to. Any decent barrister would get through this quite right, yes. I'm not. I'm retired. Lost the skill. Okay. So ring fencing, what we've been, my next sort of topic was going to be what are British in Europe and the 3 million doing now? What is their campaigning message in the light of this likely no deal? Firstly, we repeated a call for ring fencing. We published one yesterday. We sent it out to the heads of government of all EU 27 countries. For goodness sake, stand by your promises to protect us and do ring fencing. The advantage of ring fencing in the exist agreement is this. It's simple. The work has been done. Extensive. It was a year's negotiations on citizens' rights. They've done their work. They've reached an agreement. Why not just say, OK, let's have that agreement and make it stand? The other great advantage, which it has particularly for those in the UK, is that it's legally enforceable. If it's made a treaty, it will be legally enforceable. At present, the UK has the right simply to change the law, and you know, if Boris Johnson gets in, you might find that all the rights that have been conceded so far to EU citizens in the UK go. You might not. I don't know what Johnson thinks about him. But there is a volatile enough situation in the UK for something like that to happen. And so it has every possible advantage, and yet nobody will talk about it. The alternative, which has to take place, is legislation in member states to deal with exactly the situation, the crisis situation, which will happen on the 30th of March if nothing is done. In Italy, what have we been doing? We've been pressing the Italian government to support ring fencing, and we have also called for them to no longer delay giving us an answer to the question of what happens if there is no deal. Hopefully we'll get a response from them fairly soon. What we've said is you should try and emulate what France says it's doing, which is to replicate insofar as you can the rights that we would have had under the withdrawal agreement, and that would solve most of the problems that Delia mentioned. There are one or two things that can't be solved unilaterally, and that's things like healthcare, which is paid for by the UK for pensioners living here, and social security contributions, which need everybody to agree. But those probably could be dealt with in time. If we at least got a unilateral protection of our rights, that would be something. And the other thing we've been pushing for, and Charlotte will come on to citizenship in a moment, is clarification as to the situation on citizenship rights for British citizens who apply while they're still EU citizens before the 30th of March. We are hoping to get responses from that relatively soon, and we will let everyone know as soon as we hear anything. Finally, in order to put pressure from the bottom up to national government, because national government has not been quick to at least tell us what they're doing, if they are doing something behind the scenes. We've started a campaign which involves the comuni, and the idea was that because comuni are so important and sindaci are so important in Italy, if we could persuade the local administration of the problems they're going to have if we're all illegal residents on the 30th of March, which will affect comuni, it will affect provincia, it will affect regioni, it will affect ASL, it will affect all those bodies. They should be putting pressure up to, from the bottom if you like, to central government to say, sort this, it can be sorted and it needs to be sorted. For us, the comuni, not to have a massive problem, let alone the personal problems of the UK citizens who are living here. We wrote a letter to the president of ANCI, which is the Association of Comuni. That letter is available on Facebook.
Preferably by email, actually. If you write to us to britsinitaly@gmail.com, I'll send it to you.
And the idea is that and there's also a sort of covering letter that you can send if you want to approach your comuni. Either the sindaco or bigger comuni, probably an assessore, something like that, to explain the problems and get them to support the pressure we're putting on ANCI. We've had an acknowledgement from ANCI. They say, yes, they're conscious of the problems, but they're hoping that the withdrawal agreement will be ratified, which is classic, let's put it off into the long grass situation. But the more pressure we can get from people visiting their local sindaco, the better. Maybe difficult in Rome, I don't know, but maybe there's an assessore that one can speak to here who would be of some assistance. Has the other advantage, which is people who feel a bit powerless in this situation can actually do something. By going to see your syndico, you can actually help to make a difference. I think that's all I was going to say. The only other thing is this. The only other solution to the problems that Delia mentioned is the one which the EU suggests, which is extremely unhelpful, which is that all of us apply for some sort of status by the 30th of March, and that Italy accepts that even though we're presently EU citizens, we can apply now for this new status, whichever one it is that is appropriate to us, because everyone will be in a different position. We don't all have the same rights. Apart from the problem that it takes a long time to process applications, and Italy's not much worse and no better than in lots of other countries in that respect. At the meeting the ambassador held last month, I think it was, in Rome, Luigi Vignali, who's the director of Italians Abroad for the Italian Foreign Office, said he didn't want anyone making any applications for permissions now. So they've left themselves something like 2 months to process applications. It's not going to be possible. But that may be the only solution, which is to turn up in January, maybe en masse, to say, all right, I want some rights, please, and this is what I want. But it's not easy, because you have to have certain levels of income, you have to have health insurance if you're not working, you have to have a work permit. It goes on. It's all the problems that used to exist before we joined the EU.
Can I just make